I'm going to try something a little bit different today with this spoiler talk review. Since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was kind of a mixed bag for me, I thought it would be appropriate for me to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly coming out of this movie. And topics can include everything from stuff that actually went on in the movie, to external things like fan reactions and box office. I might do this again if you guys enjoy it, so please leave your feedback in the comments down below. And without further ado, let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know.
So when it comes to the good things about Guardians 3, the most obvious thing would be Rocket Raccoon and his story. And this part of the movie is told through flashbacks that are scattered throughout the film. In a lot of ways, Guardians 3 feels like a good smaller film wrapped in a somewhat mediocre bigger film. It just so happens that that smaller story was just enough to keep me invested.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
We see everything from Rocket as a baby raccoon in a testing lab, to him making friends with some of his fellow subjects, to him steadily growing in intelligence and actually helping the people around the lab with their research, to him coming to the conclusion that he is being used and will ultimately be exterminated along with his friends. And this all leads to somewhat tragic events and ultimately his escape. It really is a roller coaster of emotions, and honestly something that I didn't think James Gunn was capable of doing.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
This section of the film does serve as a PETA-inspired statement on animal cruelty. It is overt, but it does fit within the context of the story. And it doesn't feel shoehorned in like some of the other messages in modern movies. And being an animal lover myself, I'd be lying if I said I didn't connect with this message on a bit more of a personal level.
Message!
The other good from this movie involves Chris Pratt's Peter Quill. I mentioned how I watched Volume 2 prior to this, and all of his scenes that should have been highly emotional in Volume 2 just came off to me as unintentionally hilarious. In Volume 3, however, I feel like Chris Pratt gives a performance that's much closer to what he's actually capable of doing as an actor. Everything going on with Star-Lord actually felt so much more natural to me this time around. He really sells us on this dire situation they all find themselves in, with his best friend Rocket on the verge of death after an attack from Adam Warlock.
Why do you cry?
Chris Pratt as Quill basically carries the portions of this movie that do not involve Rocket's origin. Even his little quippy responses weren't as obnoxious and out of place this time around. This movie actually made me more interested in the Peter Quill Star-Lord character than I've ever been, which is saying a lot. And it helps that the movie doesn't end in a dance-off as well. When Quill barges into the base of the High Evolutionary, even if his plan seems a bit misguided and not well thought out, I admired his determination to get what he needs in order to save Rocket's life. He just came off as more of a hero this time around, more so than he does an imbecile in other movies.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
The other really good thing from this movie just involves how they gave all the characters a seemingly satisfying ending if in fact this is the last time we see them. At the very least, every member accomplished something by the end of this movie. And every member feels like they are on the right path that they always should have been on once the movie concludes. Just having Peter Quill return back to Earth and reunite with his grandfather, basically completing his story where he's constantly looking for a family. It's a very satisfying stamp on this entire series. Also, making Rocket the captain moving forward after we've just seen everything that he's been through up until this point, that was the perfect choice and a great way to end the series as well.
I like it a lot.
And now it's time to move on to the bad, or the stuff that just really didn't work for me. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to start with the High Evolutionary. Now I'm going to say I did like the idea around this character. Just the fact that he has this Dr. Moreau quality to him, where he's making these hybrid species to populate this alternate Earth that he's kind of building in his own image. I liked all of that. I didn't like, however, how most of his scenes just boiled down to him yelling a lot.
We ain't found shit!
He's got kind of a short fuse, and by the end of the movie, that feels like his most defining characteristic. He's not as boring as Kang was, but he is lacking any kind of depth that would make him at least somewhat memorable. The scene where he flips on Rocket and tells him that he's basically nothing more than a mistake was probably his best moment. But his more modern day scenes left something to be desired, in my opinion. Another thing that I didn't really care for in this movie was Gamora. And this is the alternate version of Gamora that really has no connection to Peter Quill whatsoever. And it feels like she's just there to have Gamora in the film and nothing more. They wanted her there because she's a recognizable face. She's a recognizable name, but they really don't have a lot for her to do. She spends most of her screen time just kind of standing around looking angry, or hanging out on the ship while the others are out handling business. I also think it just kind of cheapens her death to bring her back, especially when they really aren't doing anything new with her character to justify her new existence.
I don't get it.
The final bad involves Kraglin, played by Sean Gunn, another character who's just kind of there in the film. He's got this weird subplot going on where he won't apologize to a talking dog, and then he kind of just disappears through most of the movie, and then they try to shoehorn in this heartfelt moment with him at the end where he sees Force Ghost Yondu, and Yondu gives him some kind of little pep talk. I don't know, to me it just seemed like he was there so James Gunn's brother has a job.
That makes sense.
To me, his portions of the movie could have been cut out completely and nobody would have known the difference. And it would have made this far too long movie a bit shorter. And finally, we have the ugly, and I'm going to start with Adam Warlock. Right off the bat, I think it was a mistake to introduce this character now after he should have been such a big part of the Infinity War saga. But also to introduce him in this way just felt like another misstep, and a long line of missteps, with some of these quirky MCU side characters. Adam Warlock to me got the MODOK and Taskmaster treatment. Somewhat fan-favorite comic book characters that are altered and cringified to the point that they feel more like a parody than the actual characters themselves. They do try to explain his man-child demeanor away in the film by basically saying he was just born prior to this, but it's one thing to make him naive or reckless because of his inexperience. It's another thing to make him a self-proclaimed babysitter as he fawns over and takes care of some random fuzzy creature that he met throughout the film. He just doesn't feel like a big deal at all to me, and given his history in the comics, he probably should. If for no other reason, it feels like he was only added just so they could say that Adam Warlock is in the MCU. But I don't see what the point is if all you are going to use him for is another vessel for more cringe comedy. He's basically the bad version of Drax, a walking, talking joke.
But why?
Speaking of jokes, while the comedy does feel toned down, there were still those James Gunn moments that made me roll my eyes, like Drax talking about his shit being shaped like a fish, or showing Gamora on the toilet for reasons. Things like this that James Gunn and a lot of his fans probably think is hilarious, I just don't personally care to hear or see. I just don't find it interesting when superheroes talking about going to the bathroom.
That is one big pile of shit.
And it feels like all roads are leading to James Gunn's Superman pissing a hole through a locomotive because he probably has superpowered urine. This quirky shit has kind of run its course, and I think it's time to grow up just a little bit. But deconstructing comic book characters in the worst way possible is kind of James Gunn's thing, so I guess I better get used to that now that he's taking over the reins in the new DCU.
We're doomed.
The other ugly that I'm going to bring up is an external issue I've seen with this movie, where James Gunn fans have resorted to slandering Christopher Nolan and his Dark Knight trilogy on social media, all in an effort to make the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy seem more superior. And I've actually seen this a lot in the last couple of days. And it really does make it difficult for me to be complimentary to this film in any way. I get it, The Dark Knight is the gold standard for comic book movies, and all of these people know that even if they won't admit it. And it's 2023 and everybody needs a hot take.
That's bait.
But it's not a good look when you have to insult some of the best comic book movies ever made, and one of our finest living directors, just because you feel insecure about the movie you chose to back. I say proclaim your love for the Guardians of the Galaxy all you want, but when you resort to tearing down masterpieces to prove your point, you are basically ruining your own credibility at that point. And it really doesn't help the film that you're desperately trying to hype up, because most people know bait and phony opinions when they see them. And if these movies are as good as you claim they should be able to stand on their own. If you have to work this hard to convince people that they are good, then maybe they aren't as good as you think that they are. Something to think about.
Y'all be cool. Right on.